Welcome back, Steve Malzberg. We continue with Governor Scott Walker from our previous conversation yesterday. He's the author of his great new book, Unintimidated. I asked him, how far can Obamacare go, and how quickly do we have to act to make sure it doesn't go too far before it becomes irreversible? And here's how it went. All right.
If along the way, and I've argued earlier on this year that we should push to postpone, because there's no way this president, under any circumstance, no matter how low his polls are, he doesn't stand for election again. He's not going to stand for an outright repeal up front. And I obviously disagree with his policies, but I think many of us, if you're in this position, might do that on a different policy. But I do think there is a legitimate case to be made to postpone not just the employer mandate, but the individual mandate. And if you push that back enough, then you do get the time. You mentioned you win the Senate 14, and then 2 years later you get a new president. Because I think most Americans, even those that are kind of in that persuadable, middle-of-the-road type category, they see what a mess this is. They see the chaos there. They see people falling through the cracks. I think that's a reasonable expectation that most of them made for prime time. And in that time, we can make the case for a much more viable alternative, which to me is a market-driven one. Don't have the federal government nor the state government telling me or my family what I do with health care.
Buy your across state lines.
Addresses all those issues, but doesn't have the mighty hand of the government involved in that. And I think people have seen that this is an abysmal failure. They should know, that Obamacare really is the evolution of Hillary Care back 20 years ago. I mean, she was really the one who created this, and this is just the full extension of that. And that's something we don't want to see continue.
So, Governor, when Bill Clinton made his statement that, even if you have to change the law, these people should be able to keep their policies, was that the first salvo of Hillary separating herself from this and running from Obamacare, when, as you say, it's merely really an extension of Hillary Care, which will come up in the race in 2016?
It was very, very similar to what we saw 20 years ago in that Clinton White House when she was the one leading the charge in that regard. I do think it is one where I don't agree with Bill Clinton's policies, but his politics, he's brilliant. Here he's trying to remove himself, and he apparently is one of the people advising the president at the time to make this promise. Part of the problem with this White House right now is it appears to be that most of their policy decisions are driven by their political shop and not by their policy side, so that they're making promises they just can't. They can't follow through.
Will this be the read my lips, no new taxes, or the Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall? Will this be the legacy of Barack Obama? If you like your insurance, you could keep it. If you like your doctor, you could keep it?
I think there's a real sentiment of that. And I think that's why, when I talk about the book, there's that big frustration with Washington. That's why more and more I think people are going to look to leaders coming out of the states to say we offer the better contrast.
And in all likelihood, running against Hillary Clinton, whoever the Republican is, tagging her with Hillary Care, Benghazi. I mean, and this is something we haven't talked about, and this is my fear with, or question, especially if you have two governors running, foreign policy. So let's talk just briefly a little bit.
I look at that and I say, even for somebody who was Secretary of State, you look at the failures of Benghazi saying she can claim to be experienced, but that's not necessarily good experience. The bigger issue...
What difference does it make? That soundbite of hers hopefully will be used.
Well, and the other part of it is to look at the mess. I mean, Hillary Clinton's been a product of Washington for decades. I mean, the claim out of whether it's from New York or Arkansas or Chicago, she really goes back to her days even staffing, being involved. She is a product of Washington. She's a part of the Washington culture. And I think for many Americans, they look at that and say that Washington's... Even the president, in a moment of candor, said you can't fix Washington from within.
Right, yeah.
That's about one of the few things I agree with him on.
Yeah.
You need to bring in somebody from outside. And again, that's why I talk about the reforms we've done in Wisconsin, but also the larger reforms that are being done in states led by Republicans all across the country.
Talk about, as we talk to Governor Scott Walker, the author of Unintimidated, a Governor's Story and a Nation's Challenge, here on the Steve Malzberg Show. The hardest part, when you look back, I mean, I would imagine having a son, particularly in the book, and a letter that was sent to you, and you had a lot of these, but this one in particular, someone who was talking about killing you, someone who was threatening your family, said they knew where your family lived and worked, and your kids went to school, and they followed them. I mean, that has to send chills up and down your spine, and it's got to weigh on your mind constantly.
Yeah, I had tons of death threats, but this one was pretty vivid. I put the whole letter in the book. It was directed to Tonette, my wife. Talked about my kids, where they went to school, where my wife, excuse me, where my wife worked, where my father-in-law at the time lived, where my parents were at. And, talked about Wisconsin's never had a governor assassinated. I mean, it was just chilling, but instead of intimidating me, what it did was it really ticked me off and made me say, I need to dig in and do the right thing even more. That people aren't going to come in, particularly from outside of my state, and intimidate me or the legislature from doing what ultimately we were charged to do in the first place, to take big, tough decisions, tough but prudent decisions that we're seeing are paying off today. I mean, we had a $3.6 billion deficit.
Absolutely.
We have a surplus. We've cut taxes $1.5 billion. We've improved the economy. We've got things back on the right track. Had we not made those choices, had we been intimidated and backed away from that, we wouldn't be in a good position we are today.
And finally,
all right, folks, there you go. Governor Scott Walker, the book, check it out. The book, as we have mentioned, is called Unintimidated, A Governor's Story and a Nation's Challenge. Governor Scott Walker, Republican, Wisconsin. When we come back, former Majority Leader of the House of Representatives, Tom DeLay, will weigh in on a bunch of issues, including